It's turned out really well so far. Morning, everyone. It's on. Yeah. Yes. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back. I see some faces from yesterday. Is there a switch? Or yeah, it's just bedazzled. Hello? Yeah. Awesome. User error. Flip the switch. There we go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. I see some faces from yesterday as well as some new faces. It's lovely to have you this morning with us to discuss two plays, starting with the Book of Will, and then we're going to switch over in an hour to discuss Hamlet. My name is Kate Moncrief, and I am one of the play seminar directors here this summer, as well as one of the dramaturgs. I'm here from Massachusetts, where I'm the head of Humanities and Arts at Worcester Polytechnic. It's my third season here in Utah. I grew up in Nebraska, so I am very happy to come to Utah in the summer. It feels like coming home, and I'm delighted to be back. Will my partner introduce herself?
I'm Isabel Smith-Bernstein. I'm the other dramaturg and seminar director. This is my fifth season here as a dramaturg, my first as play seminar director. When I'm not here, I live in Boulder, Colorado, where I'm a doctoral student.
And Isabel, you give a really good description of what a dramaturg is. That gets asked a lot. So why don't you say what that is, and then I'm going to turn to our guests.
Sure. So there's a short answer and a really long answer. So I'm going to do the short answer. A dramaturg is responsible for the historical and literary support in the room. We do a lot of research, and we look at historical and contemporary contexts and do research on them and synthesize them.
Great, thank you. We're really lucky this morning to have both our director and our assistant director, and I'm going to let the two of them introduce themselves. Do you mind saying also just a little bit about your history with the festival as well as this year?
Sure, I'm Melinda Funstein, director of Book of Will, and this is my 20th season with the festival. I was 2 when I started. So 18 years spent as an actor, and this is my 2nd as a director. And I live here in Cedar City, Utah, and I'm a mom, and I run a nonprofit, and I'm a director and maker, and I'm so happy to be here with you all this morning.
Do you want to give me the name of that nonprofit?
The nonprofit's name is Statera Arts, Statera.
My name is Sarah Stoll, and I'm the assistant director on the Book of Will. This is my 2nd season at the festival. Last year, I was also Melinda's assistant director on The Merchant of Venice, and I also worked on before.
Thank you. So I want to start by just letting you talk a little bit about this play. What's your relationship to the play? Why this particular play? Why might it be special here? Your vision, whatever you'd like to open with about the Book of Will.
Absolutely. I love this play, first and foremost. I love Lauren Gunderson, the playwright. I've been waiting my entire professional career to see a female playwright on the outdoor stage, which I am so excited about. And I think there was an immediate in. How many of you have been to the festival before? Like, yeah. So I think I don't need to tell you that this play is about this festival and legacy, and in a time when so many of our friends and loved ones are dying and passing, and when things are in flux and change. And it's a play about legacy and about hanging on and preserving those things that are important to us. So I don't know what else to say, but that it's about this place, and it's about all of us, and it is the very thing that brings us all together in this room today. So
one of the things we discovered from the first day on is that this is a real Valentine to the theater.
Yeah.
And people who are working in the theater, our actors loved this show because they're saying, I'm an actor, this is me, this is my life. I get to talk about what this is and who these people are. Theater communities tend to be both large and small. We're all connected in we know each other, or we worked with this person. And so this play really spoke to us as sort of a Valentine. We do get a little emotional talking about it. It was almost an emotional experience working on this. Sarah, would you like to add anything about this play?
I would just agree with everything that's been said. I mean, the show is theatrical in nature, and it was a really great group to work with, a really awesome team. We had awesome actors, designers, director, and getting to hear all of them talk about like moments of the show that were their moment of like, this is what theater is to us, and like especially at a Shakespeare festival, this show being about like the preservation of Shakespeare specifically. It's just a really beautiful show to work on.
Yeah, great. So I think I'd like to open up the microphone to your questions. We want to spend as much time with you and with our directors as we can, and you can ask us anything. And Darcy is Darcy is out of the room for a moment. I'm going to run the microphone around. Who wants to go first? I saw a couple hands. Yep, let me start right here.
It never occurred to me, is my
Yeah.
It never occurred to me that we wouldn't have the Shakespearean plays. I mean, of course, they're there. And so this was an amazing wake up. Oh, we might not have happened. And we've got 2 dramaturgs here. I want to know how much of this is historical. Where did all the information come from? How did this play get put together? I thought it was fascinating and I loved it.
Can you start us out?
Sure. Lauren Gunderson pulled as much as she could from history. So what we don't have a lot of information about is the women in the play, of course. So we don't have much information about Rebecca and Elizabeth, or about Alice. We know a little bit about their families, how many kids they had, how many they think survived, and how many died. But we know most about Henry Condell and John Hemmings, and of course the Kingsmen So there is a lot of research, some conflicting research, but there is a lot of research about how it was preserved, and you saw a lot of that displayed last night.
It was very detailed, and much of it is accurate. There are some liberties taken for storytelling, and I think one of the best liberties is that Lauren Gunderson tells the tale of the women who were definitely there, but who are not recorded in history. So to find their stories, even their names, Alice, we don't even know the names of the children there. So Alice is something she invents and gives us. We know that Hemmings had 14 children and half of them survived to adulthood. We don't really know anything about them. And so I think the life and the air and the breath that she gives to women is one of the extraordinary things. But tiny little details, the names of the people mentioned, the timing, how the printing worked, words like compositor, or the presses have to be stopped because there's this dispute with other publishers. That's all accurate. So we did a lot of research. I made a huge packet before we came to the show. And then the actors and the director asked a lot of questions, and we looked a lot of things up in the moment and dug down into the history. But Gunderson gave us a great script with a lot of accurate history in it. Right back there. I'm gonna leave this mic in the audience, and so could you kind of look at each other and I'm back, but I'm gonna be gone. Okay, so we're gonna handle this. Pay attention to each other and hand this microphone around.
Just what she mentioned, and what we were talking about earlier, I think it stuck out to me was immediately because I love family history, was I thought, here's another example where we need to keep the records, even if it's not William Shakespeare, because somebody would be William Shakespeare, you know. And so I was really impressed with that message. The other thing that impressed me was how good, because I've seen so much murder and mayhem in the last couple of days. It was just refreshing to feel the goodness of the people who held the records, and whether it was real or whether it was written in by the, I can't remember her name, the wrote the play. I was just impressed about the goodness. I just felt the goodness in the people, and that was refreshing to me. And so I just want to thank you, because the acting especially was awesome, of course.
I agree.
And so we're always grateful for the actors. But the message to me was that I had a good feeling at the end of the play, even though I missed, we did comment that the wording wasn't quite up to William Shakespeare's wording, but it was better in the sense that the goodness shown, and it had such an important message for us to keep our records. So.
You talk about the wording, and one of the things I love about this play and about doing it on this stage is that we're hearing Shakespeare's words and talking about Shakespeare's work and legacy in life in a very Elizabethan world, but through a contemporary lens. So it sounds like how we were talking about, right? Which is what it was for him and his friends and cohort then. So I love the contemporary lens that we get to play with on the honor stage for this particular piece.
Thank you.
There's one right in front of you. There we go, thank you.
So I also had that light feeling, that loving feeling from this play, regardless of the amount of death that's in the play. And so I wanted to just ask a little bit about actually religion and its ties with the play, because it seems to handle it very humbly, where he says, I don't go to the church, I go to the theater, this is where I find peace. And I'm just wondering, as a director, how do you handle that, where you're sort of juxtaposing a culture that might be offended by that potentially, but not. Like, what I'm trying to say is that it was very uplifting, very, very enlightening, and also could almost play to any audience, no matter their secular or religious beliefs. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I think the themes in this play arise from a place of people acting out of compassion and love and respect and all good things, right? And that's what it's about, love.
And so it is my understanding that all religion and secular, non-secular, the whole point is how do we do good, right? How do we be better for each other, with each other? And so I don't really see, I think if we're telling a story that is about that, you get to receive it in whatever way it lands on you with your set of beliefs and values, right?
We have other questions? Yeah, right in front.
I can talk loud. Speaking of doing,
I'm sorry, for the people in the back, would you mind using the microphone?
they don't want to hear this. Speaking of doing good, you want to talk about the choreography, the printing sequence?
Oh, I would love to. My dear friend and colleague, Megan Brunswell Mercedes, did the movement in this piece. And we just, again, looking through a contemporary lens of what it would look like. We had information about what the printing presses were like then. We knew that there were some really big moments that were described by Lauren Gunderson in 2 lines of text. She basically says, and then you make magic happen. We knew that we didn't want to be literal about the printing press.
No,
It would have been dull. Yeah, who knows? I mean, in another production, maybe that
I've
would
been in a
work.
printing shop, it's dull.
It would have been cumbersome, right?
Right. But when you start looking at the materials that are innate in that space, in the wood and the materials that are already in Apollo Weaver's set and what we were playing with, and then when you think of how it's going to be lit, by Michael Pasquini, who's also here, and then you think about how it's going to be scored by Lindsay Jones, and you think about how theatrical the piece is anyway, then your imagination is just set light about what it could be. And Apollo gave us some fantastic furniture that is very descript and yet universal and versatile. And so we just played with what, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we just, imagine what it would be if the people themselves, that the act of, they themselves became mechanized and that they became the printing shop themselves.
Could you talk about actors involved in the process? Like how that piece came about?
Oh, they were so patient. About the actors' part in the process, and it was a wholly collaborative room. We would, as it was from start to finish, with all of the designers, I imagine this thing, let's make this thing happen. And then we had 30 people's creative juices all over it. It's just really, we would just say, I think we're gonna come in here, we're gonna leave here, and we need to hit these spots in between. And then everybody, it was all hands on deck. It was a really, really lovely process.
And specifically with the choreography, if I can add, the actors started out with some improv that Megan led, that she was like, I want to emphasize certain beats, but I want to see how you guys move in this world and of this play and what movements, what ideas you have, and lots of the different, how the pieces of furniture interact or how the people interact came from just improvising in the space before we even had sound, before any of that happened, that then was finessed and choreographed into a very specific thing that definitely came from the actors as well.
Wait, who has the microphone? Who's next? Yep, great.
So I have a more technical question, which is in the play, they talk about how Pericles and I think one of them, maybe Timon and Atreus, are like less canonical or in dispute, and how they're not going to get into the original folio. And I was comparing like what the 36 they were talking about with the, I think 38, 39 they're in the playbill. So why do we consider Pericles and some of these other ones to be properly Shakespeare now, but they didn't then? Can you speak to the history of and the legitimacy there?
Okay, so that running joke on Pericles is pretty great, right? And
you might jump into this too, because I know you've done a lot of work on Pericles, but Pericles now scholars believe is a collaborative piece. And that 2/5 or maybe 3/5 of it are written by George Wilkins. So that little joke, I thought Wilkins wrote that, is what she is referencing with Pericles. It did not in fact appear in the first folio. It wasn't published until the third folio. Troilus and Cressida, the little story that's going on at the end about it's in, it's out, that actually happened because Wally, another printer, had the rights and pulled it, and they were disputed. And so the first few copies of the folio that were printed without it. They stopped the presses, and that actually happened. They just crossed out pages. Paper was so valuable and so expensive that they wouldn't throw a half-printed page away. So one weird little detail about the first folio is that there are no two copies of existing first folios that look alike. There were about 750 printed. We have about 289 or something. A couple others keep getting discovered. But they would do stop press corrections. They would print pages. They would look at them to proofread them. If they found an error, they would fix it, and they would continue to print. So no two folios look exactly alike. And there are still 3 copies of the folio that are printed without Troilus, those initial presentation copies. One is in the Folger Library in DC. And then they did, in fact, get the rights. It's a little more complicated than Gunderson gives us, but they found it had been registered earlier by another printer. The dispute was somehow resolved. They added it back in. But you'll notice on the table of contents to the first folio, they didn't reset the table of contents. They just printed what they had, so it's not actually listed in the table of contents. And I think she gives us a really nice summary of that complicated history, and she gets it right. So does that help?
I just wanted to say that the scene with the printing, again, to hear his words and then be surrounded by his words was magical. But the line that Betsy says, when she says Shakespeare does not write for the scholars, he writes for the people, was so poignant to me, given everything that's going on with the Atlantic articles and everything that's being said about the scholarship. I don't care. Shakespeare wrote them as far as I'm concerned. So thank you so much.
Questions? I think the microphone's still in reverse today. So you can run into this so you can start. Hand that one to you. Thank you.
I love the play. I thought it was fantastic. Speaking of the language, I thought it was really refreshing to have the language more contemporary. I just thought it was just much more accessible for me. The one point in the play that actually did lose me a little bit was at the very finale when the whole ensemble was on stage and they were all, doing lines at the same time. I was totally on board with that. And then there was a sound design thing that happened that I don't know if maybe it was an effect on the person's voice, but it was hard for me to understand what was being said or what the significance of that was. So that lost me. If you could kind of explain what that was about, that'd be great.
Happily, yeah. There were, I think the point at the end of the play is about sending, being very small in the room with it at New Place with Anne and Susanna and Henry and John, and then sending those words and those works out across time and across cultures, across beliefs, across lands, and that was our way of attempting that. The cacophony at the end, which is asked for in one of there are 2 options in the play, or at the end of the play. And you can either do the simple option, which is just the close of the book and it ends, or you can do this cacophony that's suggested. That is up to you to create. We did it by asking the full company for their voices, and we used different languages and different cultures, different background. I mean, there are people from across the organization. And then the text that was chosen was pulled from people in the cast. We asked them their favorite lines of Shakespeare and asked them why. And that you can hear that in the cacophony, represented in the cacophony. And also, if any of you picked up any of that paper at the end, you can see that represented on
the backside of the folio that was printed, with the quote from each of those actors.
Back here in the red shirt.
I just have a quick question on copyright. That succession of interest, I'm sure over time, I'm sure you license these plays in some capacity or another. I'm wondering how ownership succeeded over the years. And is there a foundation or some such entity that has the rights and copyright to whom you license it, and who that foundation was and how in fact you got the information?
So Shakespeare is actually public domain, which is why so many high schools do it actually, because it's free to put on. It was published so long ago that its copyright basically has expired and nobody ever renewed it. So it's free for anyone to do.
And then back here in the back row.
Good morning. Had the pleasure of seeing the show at Art of Shakespeare a couple seasons ago, so it's totally delighted to see what's going to be here in Utah as well. Been having a time with the production in Oregon, she'd seen it more than once, so thank you for making it possible to see it a second time. The emotional poignancy of the sequence between John and Rebecca when she's bedridden. First time I saw the play, I didn't realize that she was going to die on me. So I was curious to see how you folks are going to handle that. And it's a very beautiful, ethereal quality to the way her death came about. Made me think of Valjean at the end of the play when he's created by Fontaine, Eponine, and it's very, very lovely the way Fox handled her death. So thank you for a very lovely production. Really enjoyed it. Well, thanks for bringing Chris Nixon here. I don't know if, just out of curiosity, did you know who the actors, were you able to choose some of the actors, or you just told them they were going to do it?
I was able to choose many of the actors. Yeah.
Then who's next? Over there. Darcy gets her steps into the morning.
I'm sorry, I already made a comment, so I'm out of turn, but the other thing that I really enjoyed was just one little small moment when the daughter is sitting down and studying and they're changing the sets and they, it's just like a dance routine where they bring the chair from behind her and put it under her feet just as she's bringing her feet up and put her feet down on it. I don't know why, but that just really was amazing to me, and the timing of that and how perfectly it all went together. I just had to comment on that. Sorry.
Thank you. That's one of my favorite moments. Lighting wise, set wise, just the whole composition of that piece is one of my favorites.
And then back here in the shrubs.
This week I've seen paper falling from the ceiling quite a few times, different meanings each time. Is this a part of a theme for the festival?
It wasn't on purpose. But actually, that's a really good point. All 4 shows that had a preview now have something made of paper or plastic that falls from the ceiling.
Anyone next? Y'all are a quiet bunch. Back here.
This is a Shakespeare question. Settle my ignorance. The photo that they printed, Shakespeare really didn't leave a photo, right? Did people really know where they were from?
That particular engraving, and we might have a policy to that, you did a lot of research on that, but that particular engraving, we as Shakespeare scholars now look to that as one of the 2 likenesses that we believe are closest to Shakespeare because it was produced by people who knew him. And the joke in there has to do with the printing of that engraving. It was printed first in the first couple copies of the folio, and then it was altered to add more shading to the rough. The differences are subtle, and Paula worked on this quite a lot. Is the microphone close to you? The joke about it looks like a ham on a platter. The first version, there's not very much shading, and so his head seems to be floating in midair. And there are 3 or 4 copies of the folio that have that first engraving. It was then altered, and more copies were printed, and it was altered again. But that likeness, as well as the carved likeness that's on his grave in Stratford upon Avon, scholars look at it and say, people who knew him said this looked like him. There are some paintings that, you know, have various degrees of prominence and various degrees of scholarly authority. There's been a couple of new portraits, like the Cobb portrait, which is sort of a young, sexy, good-looking Shakespeare versus the kind of balding, village Shakespeare that we know now. But yeah, that engraving, the people who knew him commissioned that and said it looked like him. So there you go. Paul, can you talk about the process that you went through to get that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a funny thing because the actual differences between the engraving are really subtle, and a lot of times we need to sort of cheat things for the stage. And when I sent, so there's 4 different versions of that engraving that it was changed 3 times during the process of printing it. And I sent the first and the third to Melinda, and she was like, I literally can't see the difference between them. And so we had to employ also the magic of Photoshop to accent like some of what the differences were. So the versions that appear on stage are versions that we doctored to push it a little bit to accent the things that they're talking about. But we wanted to also remain very faithful to what that engraving actually was and what the changes were that were made to it. And that's just one of those sort of interesting things of like sometimes real life doesn't quite read from stage and we need to keep. So we did.
Around this way.
We were watching it, and for me, that this is the first experience, especially with the Book of Will, and I was amazed at the relevance of the production. And I guess it goes to like this lady was saying about family history and getting it right and being authentic, and how the Shakespeare's plays are still relevant today, obviously. And they speak to our times as well. And I'm just struck by the relevance of it all.
Hello, all.
I was wondering if for either the cast or the production staff, what scenes or characters were particularly emotionally resonant that were maybe difficult when you were writing or rehearsing. And I have another question where you can answer that first.
What characters were, can you repeat?
Particularly the characters who, you know, Burbage or some of the other characters who died while they were making the book. If those were like, if you have had people in your lives who died, this spoke to you really personally, or to the cast that were difficult to you performing it or rehearsing it?
Oh, nothing was difficult to, in terms of the cast and the characters. Do you have anything?
I think one of the things that when we first started this show, we have a system of primary rehearsals, but then also secondary rehearsals where actors can work with the voice coaches or the choreographers or the dramaturgs. And in the first week of rehearsal, I met individually with every actor in the show at Melinda's request, and we spent a whole hour looking at the history of their characters. So digging deep into the biography, if there was a painting, if we had a sample of their handwriting, all those little details. And I would say to a person, the characters really resonated with the actors. I mean, they were able to dig into their biographies and find those details that meant something to them. And that was really individual to each actor. I already spoke to the fact that a lot of actors said, this is about us. I get to play an actor who has had all of these roles and had these people in life. Or others said, you know, I think everybody's been touched by loss in some way, a dear person, a loved one, a sudden shock. And so there were, I think, points of contact for everyone, but people really liked playing these real characters and finding out more about their lives, and those provided different points of contact for people.
Oh, my other question I had to recall, I know with the history plays, you have these kind of a fair while in advance. This play particularly made me think of Shakespeare in Love, and I thought, like, if that was thought out at all in advance, or how far you knew you were going to be doing this for the festival.
Yeah, this was chosen with all of the other titles at the same time as the other titles were chosen. So we all had, I don't know, I guess we started in September, really starting to have preliminary conversations and meetings. And then around December, I think we were looking at Apollo and Michael for, what was that? Yeah, we've had a good 6 months together of really having our heads wrapped around it. And that's the same with all of the plays have had.
The play's only 2 years old. It premiered in 2017 at the Denver Center. So this is a very new play. It's had only a couple of productions. It's quite popular regionally right now, but we are among the first, not the first, we are among the first to do the play.
Well, Melinda, I'm wondering, since we've been covering the festival for a long time and really enjoyed seeing you as an actor, so I'm wondering how you would compare your directing and acting. And I was thinking, you see sometimes the director is also acting, and would that be possible for you to be directing a play and acting in the play at the same time? Because that would be the best of both worlds for me to be able to see.
I'll quote Becky from the play, possible, but not probable. I actually did that this year, and I don't know that I'll ever make the mistake again. Acting is something that I'm directing. Yeah, it's a joy to direct. I loved my time as an actor, but I always had more opinions, and so I was looking at the whole arc and the pictures and things that I had no business focusing on as an actor, working on my particular track. I really love the collaborative process. I love having conversations and creating with individuals and seeing the full product come together. And I really love being able to envision something that is way out of reach, and then figuring out how to make this come together with all of the artistic geniuses in the room. It's really my most favorite part of the process.
And then back here in the blue.
I was wondering which scene was the most difficult to make?
Well, we just finished that last scene in the first act, the Syndicate, where it's a triple scene. We have Hamlet going on the Globe stage, and then the Syndicate happening, and then Alice running through the town looking for her father. That was among the most complex. All of those duo and triple scenes were complicated. Really just to make sure that the story points were popping where we needed them to pop, in every way, textually and scenically and lighting wise. All of those pieces were coming together. So I really can't pick out one. Really, all of the duo and trio scenes.
Let's stand back from this play a little bit. You might think about how many short scenes there are, and that they're in different locations. And so I think one of the challenges and one of the things that went so well with this was using that beautiful stage to create different locations. And every move is blocking and choreographed. And so really thinking through specifically, where are we in this moment? And then what happens next, and how do you transition between those things to make it all smooth? So there's a lot of work that went into each of those little moments. To your credit, beautiful. And then back here in the light blue.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thoroughly enjoyed. There's a moment when John and Henry are on stage. They had a little dialogue, it's the darkest stage. Had this dialogue. It was moving beyond belief, and I couldn't figure out why it was being moved. But the words were phenomenal. And I found myself pondering them all night long. but how do I get them again? I mean, the whole point of the thing is you go to the play to feel those things again. How do I have access to those words? Where can I find these words? Something that I can Google, find.
You could purchase a copy of Lauren Everson's script.
There we go.
You could come back and see it and watch it.
Okay.
You could send all your friends. You could scribe in a document.
That's exactly what I thought.
Yeah. And then we have a gentleman here to light, and then we will start working our way around this snake.
So two kind of questions
Which
over
way
here.
do you think? It's hard to tell who's talking. Yeah, right.
I understand if you prefer. The scene opens with sort of a truthiness question, right? There's a fake version going on of the play, and the Kingsmen seem very unhappy about what the truth really is. It seems like they don't really understand who's the authentic Shakespeare. And so this led me to two questions for you. One is, number one, that seems particularly relevant for our current time when there's a lot of questions about who's got the right version of the truth and what's fake news and what's not. And then second, I wondered if in the current episode or in the current Shakespeare scholarly world, is this folio considered ground truth? Are there manuscripts that are kind of earlier versions more authentic?
That's a big question. There are no manuscripts. The only documented handwriting we have from Shakespeare are 6 of his signatures and little bits of a play called Sir Thomas More that was written in collaboration. And so that question, part of it is answered by the folio. The people who knew him got together and put together that book. There are quarto printings, so there are earlier printings of the plays. Hamlet, King Lear especially have big differences between the folio and the quarto. So the text you heard at the beginning from Boyd Hamlet, the to be or not to be speech, is the language that is in one of the quartos. To be or not to be. There's the point. And then you go, what? Wait, that doesn't sound right to me. And so there's been about 400 years of Shakespeare scholarship pondering that question of where does the truth lie? What does Shakespeare intend? The nice thing about this play showing us Ben Jonson is Ben Jonson actually did publish his own plays in folio in 1616. And so he edited them, he is the authority on them. So the Jonson folio that we have has a level of authority. We knew what Jonson wanted, the punctuation, everything like that. Shakespeare has been dead for 3 years when this process starts, and for 7 years when the book is finally printed. And how it was reconstructed, we don't exactly know. So Gunderson imagines what that work would have looked like and which texts they use. So people who are very specific textual scholars have done a lot of tracing of this, to show the second quarto of Hamlet or the first quarto of Hamlet or the folio. This version maybe has more authority. But even in the folio, there are hundreds of printing errors. So like a little example from Othello, when Othello tells his story of how Desdemona fell in love with her, he says a line about, she gave me a world of sighs. And then even the quarto of the folio, the other one says, she gave me a world of kisses. So it's printed, the word, even down to one word is different. That's a really different character. Is she giving him sighs or giving him kisses? So there's been a lot for scholars to do to try to answer that question. We don't really know what his intention was. We do know that if these people hadn't gotten together to put the folio together, half of Shakespeare's plays would be lost to us. We would not have As You Like It, we would not have Macbeth, we would not have many others. And so that level of authority is difficult to discern, but we start with the folio, we look at the quartos, editors, and theater practitioners then try to figure out, if you stay for the next seminar for Hamlet, that Isabel dramaturg, those questions about Hamlet, which version do we do? The scenes are a different order. When does this happen in the play? Which speeches do we use? What are cut? And so editors for reading and practitioners have to make a lot of decisions to figure out what goes on stage.
To your first point about truth and untruth, I think one of the things that Lauren Gunderson does so beautifully is that we're talking about the folio and the creation of that in its purest form. But then there are scenes throughout and interchanges throughout about the personal
reputation and character. You get Amelia's take on Shakespeare, and then you get John and Henry's take on Shakespeare, and Alice's take on Shakespeare, and then Anne's take on Shakespeare. And Ben Jonson has the same thing. I did not kill that man. I did not, so that all of them are in real time shaping their own reputations and trying to hold on to what is truly valuable to them. So I'm glad you noticed that.
And then here in the tie-dye.
I just wanted to ask about Lauren Gunderson, her background and where she came from. I mean, I could Google it, but I would rather hear the dramaturg's information on how she got to this point in writing this play and what other work she may have.
So Lauren Gunderson is a contemporary American playwright. She is the most produced playwright in the U.S. right now with her plays. She has some really wonderful earlier works. One of my favorites is called Silent Sky, which is about female astronomers. So many of her works are telling the stories of women. You don't know her personally, right? Do you want to?
I don't know her personally, no, I've been connected. She's been very generous to answer my question.
Yeah, I mean, she's been great about cool things with the script, but she had early success as a playwright and has many plays out there. If you Google her, look her works up. If I saw you nodding, are you a scientist in training there? You might like next to you, you might like Silent Sky. Check out, that was one of my favorites. But she's a young female playwright who's been really successful, and we love her work here.
And then we're going to try to get over to the right side over there right now. We have Brady White's blocks over here.
There's been so much accolades to the love for Shakespeare in here, and I love seeing that side. And it was such a contrast when they went to his own wife and daughter. And, there's movies out now about his personal life, but knowing what you know and you explain some of that contrast, I thought it was well displayed, the contrast of the two loves. But can you comment to that?
Sure. There's rumor, scholars are really writing on hearsay. And we think that there were mistresses. We think that he was not present at the home in the place. And so, but I think that the end of the play, again, what Lauren left room for at the end of the play was not only to use the whole play to explore what it cost these people to carry Shakespeare's work forward, but then in the most micro way, what it cost the people who were closest to him, and his kids and his wife.
There is a film out called All Is True that Kenneth Branagh has done right now. The title comes from the early title for a play called Henry VIII, which was the last one. But we don't know a lot about Shakespeare's early life other than when the Globe burned down. After that, he went home to New Place. He didn't write any more plays. A scholar named Stanley Wells has speculated that maybe he went back and forth as a commuter to Stratford, maybe a little more than we thought, but we know he had lodgings in London. We know where he lived. We know that theatrical community. And we don't know a lot about his family. We know he had 3 children. We know his son Hamnet died, his young twin. He had lost a child. So that speech that someone was talking about, the 2 men on stage where they're talking about loss and loss of children, Shakespeare was probably writing from a really personal place in a lot of that, and Gunderson is looking at that. But that relationship to Anne and Susanna and Judith, we don't know much. They didn't write, he didn't leave things behind, and so Lauren's imagining what their world would have been, and what, Dad is off in London doing his work, and you're home in Stratford and you never see him. What does that feel like to them?
And then back here in black.
Hi, I know part of preview week is to kind of see how the plays play out and make revisions. And so I'm just wondering if you can talk about the process that you use. What are you looking for as you go forth in this week or so to see how the play is going?
Oh, we're looking at 100,000 things. So many things. Just last night, we discussed changing the moments when some of the cues are called, based on timing and momentum and how things are received and what what holds your eye to what, so that, what then opens up your ear to what. And we are looking for all of the details at this point. Right now, it's really, there are major things. Right now, it's about the speed that a cue is called in, or just the timing of it, moving it 2 seconds before, and just tweaking the way something is lifted in the text to allow us to hear it more clearly, or to frame it out a little bit differently.
And then in here, the purple blouse.
I wanted to say how much I loved having the pages come down so that we could see them. And then all the pages floating down at the end, I thought was wonderful, because I think part of the play was not just about Shakespeare, which is completely amazing, but the written word. I mean, that we can know what somebody was thinking and writing in the 1600s now. That's a miracle. That's amazing. That's how people know when civilizations start, is when they have a written word. And that really touched me. I loved having the pages come down. I thought that was wonderful.
We have time for one more question, I think.
I just was curious, since Ben Jonson was brought up, if you could talk about the way his character was presented in play, how comparing what we know about him astrologically to what just made for an entertaining person on stage, and a fun and intriguing story.
Well, Ben Jonson was a larger-than-life character, absolutely. So that little line about, I didn't kill that man, and I did, it was a long time ago. He killed that man in a bar fight. He in fact did walk to Scotland and back because he wanted to. He just did. He walked to Scotland, and then he stayed there for a while, and it was big news, and he walked back. So he was a big drinker. We know that he had mistresses. We know that he had illegitimate children, and we know that he published his own works. And if you've read or seen Ben Jonson, I think Lauren Gunderson also gets right. They're just really different plays than Shakespeare. They're very scholarly, they're neoclassical, they adhere to those unities of time, space, and action. They aren't, there's not like Greek love stories in them. They're city comedies, they deal with cons and cunning people, but they don't have that expansiveness and that love that we see in Shakespeare. So I think Gunderson hit a lot of the key points that we know about Jonson. She even wove in with the town crier, was advertising some of Ben's plays. We heard those being called because we know, in fact, they were performed by the King's Men, they were performed in Shakespeare's theater. The only role that we absolutely know, we know Shakespeare was an actor. The only role we absolutely know is a role from a Ben Jonson play. So I think she hit a lot of those high notes with a larger-than-life character with Jonson.
There was somebody on the right side that I pointed to that we won't be able to get to. I apologize. Go ahead and ask us your questions afterwards. You can ask me your questions. Or anybody who chooses to stay behind. But sorry about that.
Thank you so much. I want to thank our director, our assistant. We're back to about 7 minutes to talk about Hamlet. We will also have our Hamlet director and our Hamlet dramaturg discuss. Thank you, everyone.
Was it you, ma'am? Yeah, when someone.
Thank you, James. Because I watched people say, come to see the play at the beginning. You had good questions.
Oh, that's one. That's a whole bunch of questions. All of these are super.
Oh, that's good. Oh, we're discussing breakfast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it came to the orientation, there's that. Easy. Yeah, I mean, you can see you there. So it's
That's kind of impressive. You guys are right in front.